Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining this breakout session. So I'm going to start with having each panelist introduce themselves. So your name, your role, your company, and maybe what connection means to you. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I'm Jennifer Olivas. I am Human Resources Director for the Northwest region for ERGs. And connection to me, I would say, means it's about the relationship, I'd say.
Yeah. Hi, Tristan Orford. I lead Total Rewards at SentinelOne. And that's a good question. What does connection mean to me? Yeah, I would say maybe it's about experiences, right? Like how do you have moments that matter with other human beings and communities? So that would sort of use the moments that matter framing for that one.
That's a good one. I'm Nicole Wolf. I'm the VP of Partnerships for RULA. We're an in-network mental health benefit. And I think connection to me really is about communication and finding your community.
My name is Joe Reimer. I am an HR leader at F5. F5, if you're not familiar, is a technology company with our headquarters right up the street. And I would say connection to me is really about building common understanding and empathy, ideally towards a common purpose.
And rounding and sandwiching the Jennifers here. I'm Jennifer Jones with Noom, which is a behavior-based psychology weight loss program. I am the Director of Clinical Solutions and Registered Dietitian, and I would say for me, connection, in thinking about it in the context of wellness, is really bringing the key pillars of wellness together from a well-being perspective, so physical, emotional, social, bringing all those together to really bring your best self together.
We'll start with the first question, then we'll go to Joe. Post-pandemic, we've seen shifts in workplace culture, especially around connection and well-being. What are the biggest challenges organizations face in fostering a connected workforce today?
It's a great question. And I guess I've been in a personally reflective mode the last couple weeks as we've hit what we call now the 5-year anniversary of Tom Hanks coming down with COVID and the NBA shutting down. I feel like that's sort of the starting point of the COVID experience in the United States. And it's wild to sort of think about the fact that has been 5 years and what has changed in that time. And I think that we often hear, in my role, I work closely with HR business partners that work closely then with our employees. And so we work to really capture and understand the sentiment of what is kind of happening in the pulse of our organization. And one of the things that we really hear is that while we are no longer in the acute phase of the pandemic in 2022, 2021, et cetera, a lot of the pressures that came from that time have been replaced by new pressures. And the idea that it's almost sort of like from the frying pan to the frying pan. There's still another set of new things that present challenges, whether they're geopolitical, whether they are fears of AI disruption, whether they are macroeconomic. And so that sense of connection, I think, is critical, but is also really challenging right now. It's a tough time, I think, for a lot of folks trying to figure out where they can focus control during this period.
Jennifer O., do you have anything to add?
I would say a lot of it too is going back to the connection and being connected to our workforce, because we have a different type of workforce now. We have a lot of people who are hybrid or remote. Maybe they're remote just a couple days a week versus several days a week. And so it's managing a different type of dynamic in the workplace that we're in today. So I would add that.
Anybody have anything else to add? Okay, we'll move on. Despite increased awareness, mental health stigma still prevents employees from seeking support. How can companies design benefits and workplace cultures that make mental health care more accessible and normalized? We'll start with Nicole.
Yeah, I think there's sort of 3 areas that we see. So stigma is one, especially when it comes to mental health, right? It's still a tough topic to broach at a company and an organizational level. And I think interestingly enough, we were talking about this in the back, we talk a lot about what bigger companies are doing, but for smaller companies, this is even more challenging because you know everybody personally, and to have that conversation can be really challenging. So I think the stigma is a really challenging conversation point to get over. And I think it requires leadership buy-in and a lot of communication from the top down and being willing to have the conversation and be brave and vulnerable. The other piece is really around, I think I would call it access, and figuring out how to access the care that that person needs or that team needs. So whether that's leveraging what you have within your benefits plan, whether it's reaching out to another colleague. And it's so hard to find care when you need it and what that looks like. And so I think having the resources at your fingertips, whether it's leveraging a vendor, whether it's leveraging your broker consultant, whether it's calling your friend over at another company to hear what they're doing, I think it's, again, going back to that community and building out across the network. And then the last piece I think is around, I guess, advocacy, for lack of a better term, but really being able to advocate for your employees, advocate for your team for what they need. And I think it all comes back to, like, ultimately you're trying to make sure everybody's feeling better and doing better. And without sort of that ability to access care and get people care when they need it, you can really come up against a situation where you start to break down the communication, people don't feel safe at work, and that's ultimately the worst situation. And I think to the point earlier around communication, without creating, if you have people remote and you have people hybrid, how do you create that connection? And I think a lot of it comes down to being vulnerable from the top down to start.
Tristan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe one thing to add to that, and agreed with all those points. I think normalizing the smaller interventions as well. I think that's something that I found to be effective in our organization. Is, when there are things that start to abut that sort of mental health space, or where there's things that are going to be challenging for employees. Like, how do you start to introduce those resources for people? It's like, hey, remember, if you're having a hard time, these are some resources that are available. Talk to these people, that sort of thing. So ideally, you start to intercept those problems before they become crises.
Yeah.
Jennifer J., anything to add?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, from a clinical perspective, I feel like mental health is one of those conditions that we still oftentimes think about in a silo, as opposed to all of our other, diabetes, cardiovascular health, all of that we know interplays with one another. But mental health does as well. You take stress, for example. We know people who have high stress, they tend to have poorer outcomes, lower healing or extended healing rates. It just affects everything. It affects everything, even as you're thinking about weight loss as well. So understanding that it's going to be important to have programs in place that have mental health support woven into those types of programs as well. One example I can give you just from NUM as a whole, we used to have a separate program that was dedicated to subclinical, it was our mood program, it was NUM Mood. But what we realized is that all of those tools and the resources and the content that was related to our mood program was really beneficial for everybody in every other program. So we essentially just integrated that with all of our other programs, because as you're trying to lose weight, as you're trying to handle diabetes, if you're getting clinical obesity treatment, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, and so being able to have those resources with any of your different types of programs is really important to know that that's a key component to people and being able to be healthy in general.
Anything else to add?
I want to add, there is for those who may not be aware, there is a mental health first aid certification that you can get. And that was one of the things we did with our HR team. We had everybody, it was volunteer, but everybody wanted to participate. And it's very similar to like your CPR first aid. But it was, and I think it was a 6-hour class. But it was very beneficial for us, especially within our team. It really kind of helped, for me personally, just build a little bit more knowledge on how do you respond to situations when there's employees giving some red flags and making some comments that you really don't know how to respond to. And our managers usually do not know how to respond to it. And so that has helped us even build more credibility with our managers on just knowing some signs to look for and ways to respond and guidance to provide has really, I think, been beneficial for us. So for those that you don't know, there is that option out there too.
How many of you have ever heard of the mental health first aid? Okay, so a good amount. That's good. We'll move on to Tristan. Do workers today expect benefits that go beyond traditional health insurance? If so, what are some of the most impactful well-being benefits that you've seen companies offer?
Yeah, great question. I think that's kind of part of the can't remember who was mentioning this earlier, but the trend over the last number of years where there's kind of this increasing convergence between different domains of people's lives, right? I think with all the changes that have happened to the work world, there's also, as most folks have no doubt experienced, that kind of blending between work and personal life, which I think is, goes hand in hand with the question here. So the short version is yes, I think generally speaking, especially in places like the United States where we're already playing in health benefits anyway in a way that's different than a lot of other countries. That's usually the expectation that employers are going to have some roles to play in there. In terms of the most impactful programs, there's probably a few. I mean, I think some that are emerging now that we're certainly starting to play in on the leading edge of things beyond just regular health and dental and all those other things are things like family forming benefits. I think those are starting to become more common depending on the needs and the demographics of your workforce. The other thing I would just say is like some of these, I kind of going back to the theme I mentioned earlier, some of the moments that matter, right? I think the ability to, whether it's an EAP program or your benefits program or some of these other vendors, the ability to have solutions that are tailored to specific events that people are going through, whether it's a crisis, something that's affecting a particular region or a particular group of people. Having those sorts of things is also really helpful. We've had some, even outside of the United States, we've had some, going back to like, for instance, October 7th in Israel, when that happened, we were able to partner with some organizations to provide some sort of crisis counseling group sessions for our employees there, which was really well received. So I think things like that, to the extent you can find those creative solutions, really end up meaning a lot for employees.
Joe, do you have anything to add?
I love when Tristan says that moments of matter piece, because I think that's so true. And I think where we've seen success at F5 is sort of an overall organizational recognition that those moments of matter reflect the whole employee. And the company needs to find ways to meet and support the employee during those moments. And I think that when there's that through line of sort of, hey, at a leadership level, we recognize what may be happening, or maybe what may be going on, how can we best support you? I think you see a lot more usage and a lot more sort of adoption of a particular benefit. I will also add, and I think this has been shared by others up here today, that the pandemic created this throw the kitchen sink at the problem set of benefits that came out. And from that time, there have been moments where you look and say, okay, is this getting the level of usage that we want, right? Or how do we sort of cater and tweak this in a way that maybe better meets employees' needs? But I really think that starts from a great place, right? We have raised the floor, rather, to think about what are the benefits and what is the awareness around mental health, for instance, that needs to be there, that are now table stakes for an employer. So when you start from that position, I think it really affords a lot of opportunity to further, I think, develop and build towards those moments that matter.
Yeah,
Maybe
please.
if I just might riff on that point for a minute, I think a lot of these they're also not always the most expensive solutions, right?
Right.
There's actually things that you might already have that can actually support those in creative ways that maybe we haven't used before. So I think
Absolutely.
kind of the dynamism has been actually really great to see from that perspective.
Yeah, and go ahead. I was going to say the other thing is so interesting is so much of this might already be in you already have access to it and you just don't know, right? This like lost in network concept too of these things that you already have access to and you're just trying to wade through the information. And I think your point around communication, meeting the employees where they're at is so critical too, because you can't just, we get so much information every single day. How do you find the right path for that right person at that right time, or the moments that matter to your point? And I think there's a stat, it's probably more now, but it's, it takes 7 times for somebody to actually hear something, it's probably more now. But, how do you communicate that effectively and in a way that will actually resonate with them? And then how do you find the tools and resources that don't cost an arm and a leg that you can actually bring to your employees too?
We're going to talk about employee resource groups, ERGs as what they're known as well. They're often seen as key drivers of belonging. What new approaches have you seen companies take to support and grow ERGs to improve connection and well-being? Nicole, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This one's near and dear to my heart because I think going back to the stigma, right, you might be more likely to communicate and have a safer conversation with a group that you identify with. One of the stories that I love to talk about is we had a women's ERG and they were looking for a solution for postpartum depression. And they, we actually ended up partnering with them to communicate this benefit and this resource. And a woman was able to go online, book her appointment with a therapist that, she was a Spanish speaker, the therapist is a Spanish speaker. she specialized in postpartum, she understood that need, and to be able to leverage that through the ERG was a really interesting flip of how we normally go about communicating things, which is typically through human resources or internal comms. And so I think it's a really interesting resource if it's used correctly. I think it can also go a little bit haywire sometimes, but we've seen it to be super effective when you're looking at it from, ultimately we're just trying to help this group of people that's more comfortable, being vulnerable and being brave and having those conversations together. And I think there are certain ways that you can really leverage that and getting your communication strategy where it needs to be at the right place and the right time. This moment's the matter. We're keeping that trend going. So I think it's really critical to figure out where are those places that you want to communicate, who do you have in your company that you can leverage to communicate those to, and what do those people need? Use them as a sounding board and you might get other information that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Can you give an example of how it can go wrong?
I think there's been situations where, company or groups will advocate for something or expect the company to change their benefit plan for a particular group without understanding the broader conversation. I still think it's a very helpful conversation to have when you do have those discussions, but I think ensuring there's a charter in place and the group is sort of creating this together within the company, I think it can be such an impactful and effective tool for change and for support within the organization.
Anyone else have anything to add? Okay. Managers play a crucial role in fostering employee well-being, as we all know, and connection is a big part of what they do as well with their employees. What are some best practices leaders can implement to create more connected, engaged workforce? Tristan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this goes for a lot of the practitioners in the space, I think there's a natural inclination to be hesitant to give people advice, right? Personal advice, which there's a lot of good reasons for that. And I think we want to be, I even think about our role as HR folks, for example, right? We want to be careful about not putting ourselves in the position of giving people medical or financial advice. And we still want to cut through all the noise and be able to help people to understand the resources that are out there, and that some of these things, that they're serious and they're useful, right? So there's language like, here, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but here's what I do, right? Here's what's been useful for me. It's not going to mean that that's the same for everyone, but I think those are the types of stories that help people to really engage with what's out there and make it a little bit more real. So I think those are the types of things that not just, any of these participants, including managers, can do. And I think the more that we can empower them to tell those sorts of stories with their teams, it acts as a force multiplier across the organization.
Jennifer O., do you have anything to add?
I would add something a little bit at a different angle. One of the best practices that we've found to be successful is really encouraging our managers to have regular one-on-one conversations with their people. And we're not talking about a manager walking by while employees at the counter working on the computer to find out, how things are going or how their weekend was. It was having a scheduled, could be 10, 15 minute, uninterrupted private conversation to check in with them, see how things are going, see if they're experiencing any roadblocks in getting their work done, and also kind of making that personal connection with them to get to know them a little bit better. Do they have a dog? Do they have children? How do you connect with your employee to build that trust and work on that engagement piece? And we've really found that to be very impactful. We have some district managers that actually put it on their employees' goals for their leaders to make sure that they're actually scheduling and having one-on-ones with their people. And it's a little bit harder with our managers that have production operators or drivers because they don't have necessarily the space to do those types of conversations, but they're actually figuring it out and they're making it happen. And we're really seeing a good return on that. So I think that's a good.
How do they do that then if you don't have maybe the traditional office space to be able to schedule a meeting every month or every couple of weeks? What are some of those alternative ideas that they're trying?
Well, I think it's got to be prearranged and pre-scheduled ahead of time so they know. And so it's making sure that they're there before their day starts, even if it's just a 5-minute check-in, or if it's at the end of their shift and scheduling it that way so that, again, they can just get that face time. I think that's what's most important without all the interruptions.
How does that work, I guess, as in terms of like before work time, right, unpaid time, and then after work unpaid time. Is that something that can be a point of conflict?
For us, it's all paid time. If
Okay.
if they're there, the manager should not be having those conversations with them unless they're clocked in, but
Okay. Perfect. Anything?
in my world, that's.
Yeah. That's how we hope it should be, right?
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else to add?
I would just say, I think, I keep reflecting on sort of what has evolved in the last 5 years. And one of the things that we've seen as a management practice that is, we've set it as, a good leadership approach, but is to really just have managers in those one-on-ones you're describing, just ask, how are you doing? Ask that question regularly to employees. And I think perhaps in the past, that was something that managers may have felt less comfortable doing, but you're seeing more and more leaders recognize good leadership means connecting and understanding kind of at the whole human level. And so managers are the best advocates to have and build those relationships and ask some of those questions to kind of quickly assess where the employee might need help, whether it's job related or frankly, whether it's outside of the workplace. And again, there are times when you say, okay, this might be not a conversation I'm totally ready to have. Let me direct you to the right resources there. But if the manager can engage and sort of do that early triage to support the employee, it really goes a long way in getting ahead of it earlier.
And I'm assuming by building that connection as well, it makes the employee hopefully trust and know that they can go to their manager or someone else.
It becomes
for
a flywheel,
support.
right? It's like there's more of that happening ideally then, that they feel comfortable sharing because the manager's reciprocated in their energy and action to it.
Yeah. Many employees, oh,
I was saying,
please.
just real quick to add, I think that manager relationship is really, really important as well, and having like that understanding what some potential new offerings could be, understanding, do we have enough support for our employees? Are there new benefits? Thinking more holistically as well that they're asking for, or they're asking me for resources as a manager that I can't give them. So I know a lot of times we'll survey employees as a whole and kind of get feedback as far as with the current offerings, are you happy or not, or what do you wish? But oftentimes those one-on-one conversations and that relationship with the manager can be really impactful as a way to transition higher up as far as understanding what some additional needs could be too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please, Tristan.
Yeah, one other practice I've actually implemented as a manager, as direct manager, not at an organizational level, is also encouraging team members to share good things that happen, right? I think we're kind of talking about a lot of it when there's problems, which is important. But I think if you can also have positive sharing, that sort of builds on the flywheel effect. So there's probably more comfort overall, and also helps people to celebrate wins. Like one sort of tactical example is we have on my team, we have like a work-related Slack channel, and we also have what I call an off-topic Slack channel. So that's where people can share personal stuff, right? Things they're, kids' sports game over the weekend. The fact they paid off their student loans, those sorts of things, so we can celebrate each other, and that's been a really positive.
Well, Tristan, you mentioned something when we spoke earlier before today about the way that you can communicate benefits to employees and to make sure that they're being utilized. So many employees don't always know or fully utilize what's available in their well-being resources. What are some effective ways that organizations can improve awareness and engagement with these programs? How do you help them be more aware?
Yeah, I think, well, and part of it is, as we think about how workplaces have evolved, we need to leverage the channels that we now have available to us, right? There's some that aren't available, right? Depending on, maybe in some cases this still is the case, but for many of us, we don't have the same break room, right? We're used to have the poster or the flyer that you could hand out, or that may just look different for a lot of people now than it did 5 or 10 years ago. But we also have new real estate, right? One of the, again, the little cheap trick that we use is like Zoom backgrounds. My team now creates Zoom backgrounds around programs that if we have a critical milestone for one of our programs, we'll put it on our Zoom backgrounds. I joke about it as our lead generator, but it does actually get a lot of leads for people with inbound interest. And so those things like that have been really effective. So I think, leveraging the channels that you have available and being a little bit more, I guess, leaning into being, telling the stories, right? And being a little bit more comfortable with maybe more directness around that than we would have had. Again, want to be careful that we don't get into the realm of prescribing things for people, but just saying, hey, this has worked for me, or there's people who at this company for whom this has actually been really effective and driven some great outcomes. You should check it out.
Anyone have anything else to add, Nicole or Jill?
I would just say one of the things we've been doing to drive back communication is storytelling. So ensuring people, even our team, of, okay, this is something we're driving home. And people volunteer. They're happy they want to share. And I think also that comes with the environment. But storytelling is so important, right? Because we're giving people so much information. I mean, information overload is serious. And so you get another Slack, you get another email, there's another mailer that goes home, there's another flyer that you get. How do you make that come to life? And I think that the storytelling aspect has been really interesting for us. That's worked really well.
Yeah, direct employee feedback, hearing from another peer, the success of a program is more impactful than any flyer you can hand out for sure. One other thing I would mention where we've seen a lot of people have success as far as from communication is, it's March, it's National Nutrition Month. I think it's also Women's History Month maybe, or something with Women this month. I should probably know that.
Yeah.
But tying that back to resources that you have. So for women, like whether it's postpartum or perimenopause, menopausal type support that can coincide with those monthly recognition. It just helps to emphasize, it's not open enrollment, but hey, these are the offerings we have related to these types of conditions and support that we have for you too. Just quick ways to tie that back to the offerings that you have.
I just want to say I love that. I hadn't heard that before, and I think like where you can tie in the season of life to the benefit, like just little things like that really help people like, oh, that's happening. How do I plug into that now?
See, I was here for a reason.
You got it. All right. Look at that.
And with as many Zoom meetings, I think as many of us sit in, especially since COVID, I love the idea of having something on a Zoom background. I'd never heard of that idea before. Has anyone ever tried that? Okay, that's very cool. I love just that. Another way, like you said, real estate that you it's always there, so why not utilize it? Companies are under a lot of pressure to optimize spending while still investing in well-being. Obviously, Nicole mentioned it can be really expensive. So how can organizations maximize impact without significantly increasing costs? We'll start with Jennifer O.
I would say some of the things that we've done at our place is creating like project teams to brainstorm different ideas on different ways we can improve efficiencies. You can allow that to be part of a leadership development for someone who wants to take like a lead in that project role. A lot of times the best ideas come from our people, and a lot of times it's from your new hires who you're bringing in a fresh set of eyes, you're bringing in a new perspective. We use an example in our new hire orientation all the time. It's kind of a funny example. Our president actually tells it to our new hires, but behind the counter, we have employees working behind the counter, and if a customer needs like a spindle of wire, they got to go around the corner, around the counter, around the back into the warehouse to get the spindle of wire, and then they got to bring it back. Well, we had a new hire say, well, why can't we just cut a hole and make a door in the wall? Which
Brilliant.
really, it was brilliant. And we cut the hole and made a door, and it really made things a lot easier for them. So the point is just sometimes the best ideas can come from your own people. And it's just seeking that feedback and giving them that avenue to share some ideas that they may have that you may not have thought of. So,
Nicole, do you have anything to add?
I guess I just would say you probably have access to so much stuff, we all do, and sometimes we forget what we actually have. So I think it's interesting to take stock of like, okay, what are the things our employees are telling us? What do we already have? What is already part of our broker consultant's house, for our insurance company, our insurance plan? Do we have somebody on staff that can help that's like wants to do volunteer? I just think there's a lot of times, there's a lot of solutions out there, and as opposed to Tristan's point, like let's celebrate the wins too. Like what do you already offer, and what are the things that you already have access to that you can really lean into to tell that great story of these are the benefits that we have and these are the solutions we have. It's not just we have to go get the next thing, but I do think there's so much that you already have access to, or we can create a great story around that can be a big win too for companies.
Anyone have anything else to add? Yeah, please.
I mean, this is kind of the sausage making of some of us for like those of us on the corporate side, but like really sweating like the contracts and the plan docs, right? Like that's where you're going through and doing kind of a line by line. We did this on our case when we moved to a new 401k vendor. We really went line by line and said, okay, what are all the features that we could have? Turns out there were some that we weren't utilizing. They were totally free to us. They were a great benefit for employees, and we marketed them a lot. And now we have a bunch of employees that are benefiting from those. So I think that there's probably tons of those that we could just kind of, it's one of those, it's almost like a beachcombing thing, where you can just find them, scattered about, right? That if you choose to look
Seashell,
for.
yeah.
Right. So, tons of those sorts of opportunities out there.
Hybrid and remote work models have changed how we all connect, and I'm curious what strategies you've seen that work best to create a sense of community across different work environments. Let's start with you, Joe.
So this is a great question. And I'll just give some context setting. So at F5, we have about 60% of our workforce that calls into an office, and then we have about 40% that works remote full-time. And so about 2 years ago, we started bringing that 60% back on a regular basis. And the way we constructed our hybrid work program was we ask employees to come in 30 days a quarter if they live within 30 miles of an office. And there was no expectation specifically as to what those days needed to be. It was just 30 days within the quarter. And while there was, you can imagine at that time, this is 2023, there was a lot of employee, sentiment shared around what that meant, to put it very kindly. What we found, I believe, was that as employees became more accustomed to the change, there was a recognition that them having the flexibility that they had built over the course of the early stages of the pandemic until that point could still be honored through kind of the hybrid approach. And so the grounding that gave, I think, really helped invite then, okay, now I'm coming to the office, how do I want to maximize and sort of make the best of that? And really ensure that coming to the office is worth the effort, and that we're really collaborating and kind of capturing the spirit of what's intended to do. So I will not say it's perfect by any means. It is certainly an adaptive journey that we're going through to think about how do we still maximize having this hybrid workforce where you still have, again, 40% of our organization who is not in the office. How do you instill the practices to say, with consistency, we are having inclusive meetings in terms of the conversation in the room and the conversation over Zoom or Teams? How do you think about having regular touch points for individuals that are not next to you? How do you maintain some of the sort of the shorthand conversations in a virtually inclusive way? Mm-hmm. So we're working through that. I think you learn kind of what fits for your culture, and you learn some pieces that say, you know what, we're okay, we can let that go. This is sort of where we're going next.
Jennifer J., any strategies that you've seen work?
Yeah, I think we see a lot of success when people have the ability to combine both like an in-person type of culture, community effect, but also online as well. Specifically, like in speaking how we support individuals, it's what we call our circles or our communities, which again is more pre-selected online groups. It's very similar as we were talking about ERGs. It got me thinking about that. You self-select, I want to be connected with athletes or women over 40 or other vegans, like basically topics that you can relate to. And then you're essentially anonymous in these groups. It's not anyone that's related, to you through work or your home life, but they're people that you can be able to connect with who have the same challenges that you're going through from a weight loss journey or trying to control chronic conditions. And it gives you that, again, ability to have successes you can share with them and struggles you can share with them and have that community support. And I think we can all agree that we're meant to be social beings. Mm-hmm. We're not meant to be behind a computer screen and not interacting with other individuals on a daily basis. I think we all learned that over the last 5 years. So having in-person connection and community is important, as well as having online connection with individuals too.
Anyone have anything else to add? Please.
I think it's easy to look at what's lost and sort of have the sort of mourning of what we don't have anymore. But I think there's a ton of opportunity here, right? Like we just actually had for someone on my team a baby shower for her virtually over Zoom, which there's some pros and cons versus having it in person. But if I think about when I had baby showers from pre-COVID, we were actually able to include a lot more people in her celebration that we would have never gotten to if we had been doing something in person, right? There are people literally from all over the world, across 3 continents and stuff like that. So it was like that was objectively cool, and we were able to support that and get a lot of the same feelings and even more people involved than we would have been in an in-person environment. So I think it's there's some hesitation. I think there's some social awkwardness around how is this going to be any good? And it's like you just have to get over that and just do it.
Absolutely.
As we look ahead, what's one emerging trend or innovation in workplace well-being that excites you the most? Let's start with you, Jennifer J.
All right, I'm going to say AI and just technology, innovation and technology as a whole. I think as we see that progressing in ways that it can assist and help people take mundane tasks and just improve those from an efficiency standpoint. Everything from examples we've used like AI food logging, body scanning. You think about vendors like Color and Grail that have the ability to notify people or understand what your health risks are that you wouldn't have known until you had those types of conditions or diseases. So I think, again, from AI and technology, just the way that that's advancing when it's done responsibly can be incredibly impactful for our lives in the future from a health perspective.
Joe?
The future's gonna be wild. Hearing all this. I would just, going back to, I guess, a comment I made earlier, which is just that the level of awareness to all of this is just in such a different place. And that gives me a lot of optimism amidst at times what feels very hard. It's just the levels of conversation that are happening at the corporate level, organizational level, at the person-to-person level are so different, I feel, than they were even 5 years ago. And so if that's our new starting point, I think it opens up a ton of opportunity in AI and other spaces to be thinking about what innovative benefits can come from this, what innovative workforce practices and culture practices can come from this. The sometimes naive optimist in me really believes that there is a ton of future and potential to all of this.
Nicole?
That's such a great way to put that. I love it. I think I feel similarly that these conversations we're having are so critical, and the fact that we're having them at all is amazing. And I think there's a lot more people and a lot more at the table, right? It's not just, the HR team that's thinking about this. I think it goes back to the original conversation around building this community, building this network, building connection, and I think people are craving that in a different way than they were before. And I think that presents an opportunity for a lot of innovation in what you are able to offer from a benefits perspective, what you're able to offer your employees, how you bring your employees back to work, how they connect. And I think there's gonna be a lot that we see in terms of innovation in the types of products, programming, et cetera, that we offer, that it's not just like, we're bringing flu shots on site, we checked the box. So I think there's just so much of that it just seems like people are willing to have the conversation, which I don't think was the case prior to COVID. So I think there's so much optimism, to your point, about what we can see coming in the future.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Jennifer mentioned around technology, I think there's a whole, in addition to the different use cases, I think the avenues with which people can get advice on what to do, kind of next best action in a particular situation, it opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. Even as people who run these programs internally, as folks in the room no doubt know, we're often limited in terms of what we actually know what's going on, right? We may know, oh, someone had a cancer claim. We don't actually know who that is. And so being able to have these tools where there's more ability to reach people in these important times in their lives, that opens up a lot of great possibilities.
Jennifer O?
I would say, to add to that, it's exciting to have the ability to have access to data that we haven't had access to necessarily before, which in turn then we're able to use that as HR professionals to show the business back on different ways that we can build on that data. If it's bringing awareness to maybe we had a recent example of on-call pay. We have managers misusing on-call pay. And so it's an opportunity without having access to data like that. We don't always have the opportunity to show our value and our worth from that perspective. And I think that is a good way to build those relationships with our leaders and show that we can do more with the information that we're being provided and we have access to.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the audience? We probably have time for one or two. Please.
Yeah, as a young professional myself, I understand entering the workforce, we're spanning multiple generations, from boomers all the way to Gen Z and Gen Alpha at some point. So how do you guys create connectivity across those? Because they all work very differently.
I would say,
Great question. I'll take that. Any suggestions? No.
I'll take a stab at that one. We implemented everyone's probably heard of the DISC assessment. That was something that we found in our workplace that people didn't remember what their results were. They didn't know what it meant. We implemented something that's referred to as the DOPE, and it's the BIRD assessment. And so it's still the same concept. It's a personality assessment, but we So rather than being DISC, you're an eagle if you're, someone who's direct, or a dove is someone who doesn't like confrontation, or an owl is someone who's very analytical. A peacock is typically your outside salespeople. So it really doesn't matter necessarily what generation you're in, but it's really about how you can communicate with them. And so we started implementing that because it was very well received. So we started implementing that. Every new hire now fills that out. So it doesn't matter if they're a production operator or a driver or an outside salesman or a vice president. They're filling out that personality assessment, and in new hire orientation, we do a training on what that means. And that information is given to their manager. So their manager knows day one of their new hire of what their personality type is, so that they know how to communicate with that individual, and they can modify their own personality type to when they're addressing or approaching or just having conversations with their employees. So, and we've kind of tied it back to the one-on-ones, so they have a form to fill out, and the very first question on the little form that they fill out, or if they do it online, is write down their personality type, so that it's just a remembrance of, okay, I need to modify my approach so that I'm not coming off as too intimidating or too direct or talking too much or those types of things. So maybe that's something that could work within your workplace. That's been a very helpful tool for us.
One more question? Yes, please.
You mentioned having the one-on-ones. We do that frequently at our company. What is your feeling about skip level one-on-ones and how frequently those should take place?
What do you mean by skip level?
Not your direct manager, but your manager's manager. Having those conversations.
Does anybody do that at their organization?
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I would say we don't have a formal structure as to how often that should take place, but I think you sort of started a cultural norm of transparency, right? And that there's an open door with which anybody can have a conversation with anybody. If you set that as kind of like a principle of how the culture wants to operate, I think you often find then that naturally there's ways with which those conversations start to happen. But I mean, I would highly encourage it. I think it's really good for leaders to keep a pulse to what's going on beyond just the direct report level. And I think it just also, to the earlier comments, like it opens up ideas. There's a lot of really smart people that we all work with, right? Mm-hmm. And how can you kind of break down some of the hierarchy and structures to invite those ideas in different ways? And I think skip levels are one of those great ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If
And it
my
connects
place of
generations.
employment.
And it connects generations. Hey, tie it together.
Yeah, I was gonna say
There you go.
Yeah, especially for people who are new to a workplace, it can be intimidating to talk to your manager, let alone your manager's manager. So again, just sort of creating that safe space to be like, yeah, you can come to me. Yeah, you can come talk to me. And sometimes that manager's manager doesn't know what your manager's really like. And so it's an opportunity also for that manager's manager to get a feel of what's working well, what's not for their one-on-one with that manager. So I'm a big believer in skip level meetings. Well, thank you guys so much. We're out of time. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.